Welcome to the shooting show. This week we follow Chris Dalton during the roe rut, trying his hand at a buck. Plus Byron gets to grips with the Savage Accustalker. The rut is well underway and Chris Dalton is doing everything he can to make the most of it. He's received word of a buck causing problems on his newest stalking ground. There's no better period to catch up with him than now, so we waste no time in joining Chris on the hunt.
Okay, we're out this morning, first light. What should be the peak of the roe rut on a new piece of ground, new estate. I've just taken the management over. We're going to really just have a look at what the situation is with regard to the deer and see if we can call in a nice buck. We've not got ideal conditions because it's breezy and quite cool, and that does tend to stop the roe rutting, but we'll see what happens. So we're just going to drift off down the side of this wood, and there's a cut meadow just below it which is usually favoured by deer in the morning, so we'll have a look and see what we can see.
Conditions might not be perfect, but you can't keep Chris away from a stalk, especially on new ground, where there's often the most exciting action to be had. It certainly seems that way here, as we spy something within minutes of our departure.
Got a deer now, just down below us. I think it's a doe, but there'll probably be a buck close by, so we'll just have a little look. It's about 80 yards away.
Stalking down through the plantation, Chris gets close into the doe, but the buck decides not to make an appearance. Still, all the signs are pointing to a good stalk, as the roe are clearly active.
You can see down here where there's been a lot of rutting activity in the night. We had a buck and a doe there. He's been rutting heavily with this doe here.
At this time of year, the frantic roe activity can pose a real threat to the plantation, so keeping a handle on it is crucial. Chris presses on in the hope of locating the buck, but there's no joy yet. But Chris has more than one trick up his sleeve.
I'm going to try calling for a bit now.
Chris tries his luck with a Bartolo collar, used through his pocket to take the edge off the sound and make it a touch more realistic. The plan is to sit and call for 15 minutes, then wait before moving on to a new location and trying again. While on the move, we're interrupted by the sight of fauna in the neighbouring field. It's roe alright, but not the desired buck. A promising morning soon turns into a frustrating one. The sightings of roe begin to mount up, but they're all either unsuitable or don't offer a shot. But Chris doesn't know when he's beaten. Heading back to the car, we resolve to return later for an evening stalk. A few short hours later, Chris is back out stalking the same patch. It's a privilege to be out in this scenic part of Scotland, but taking in the sights isn't going to make the farmer happy. We need to get that buck, and for now, it's still staying out of sight. Walking and stalking is the order of the day. Chris follows the same pattern as in the morning, this time alternating between the Bartolo and a mouth-operated caller. It's a tactic that has paid dividends many times before, but you never know what you're going to get in the rut. Emerging from the plantation, we spot something in the field ahead. It looks like our buck might finally have come out. The stalk is on. There's a lot of ground to cover, but we move as quickly as we can. As we get closer, we can still see the deer is holding its position. But we have to stalk through some dead ground, and when we emerge, we've lost sight of it. There's no sense in giving up now, and Chris knows just what to do. In the rut, sitting and waiting can be just as fruitful as foot stalking, especially when you know a buck is nearby. Chris switches to a distress call in the hope of drawing it out. One round of calling is all it takes. Our buck is out in the open. The long grass partially obscures it, but Chris can just see enough of its body to identify its vitals and make a safe shot. The beast jumped and ran at the bullet strike, but it dropped a few yards on, and after the customary wait, Chris is eager to head in and inspect the carcass.
Okay, so just at the death really, we had a nice little roebuck down at the bottom of this new plantation. You can see here this is a set-aside strip which is grant funded and been planted with broadleafs. That's a lot of damage down there which we're pointing out, and this is the culprit. Little 2-year-old buck, pretty little animal. Obviously dropped on the spot. My shot's a little bit back, that's the exit wound, a fairly big exit wound, so it didn't go anywhere, but ideally my shot placement wanted to be an inch further forward. Nice condition deer. Just been speaking to the farmer there, who was absolutely delighted because he'd noticed the damage about a week ago and wasn't quite sure who the culprit was, so he's chuffed as monkeys that he's no longer left here, because by the end of the summer none of these trees would have actually survived, and that would have been a replanting job. So public enemy number one as far as the farmer was concerned in this area is now no longer, and will be eating no doubt in about a week's time.
With a troublesome buck taken out of the equation, all that hard work has finally paid off for Chris and the farmer. Chris Dalton proving that he doesn't need the hound to get the result every time there. And now, the Shooting Show News.
This is the Shooting Show News. BASC has launched a new scheme to get more people to try wildfowling. It's released a new guide to wildfowling permits across the UK, designed to provide information to people who have never been wildfowling, as well as the experienced wildfowler. It includes an introduction to the sport and contact details of clubs. Also contained are sections on the law, fieldcraft, a quarry guide and the Wildfowler's Code of Practice. Download the guide now from the BASC website. Grouse shooting and hen harriers can coexist. That's the finding of the latest study by researchers at Aberdeen University. The report showed that hen harrier chicks can be reared in captivity and released into the wild, where they won't have a significant impact on shoots. Aberdeen University's Steve Redpath said there was room for 70 pairs of hen harriers across the grouse moors of England, with relatively low cost for shooting. For more news like this, don't miss Modern Gamekeeping magazine. A badger vaccination programme has begun as the badger cull pilots prepare to return for 2014. The programme is being piloted in East Sussex, highlighted as a high-risk area for bovine TB, with a view to expanding the project over the next 5 years. Though DEFRA announced earlier this year that culls would not be rolled out more widely, the 2 cull pilots in Gloucestershire and Somerset will continue. Cull dates are not publicly announced, but they could start as soon as the next few weeks. Elephant poaching could be as bad a problem as rhino poaching, recent reports suggest. A study published by the USA's National Academy of Sciences says more elephants are now being killed each year than are born. If this rate of attrition continues, says the report, the species could be wiped out in 100 years. To take part in the fight against poaching, don't miss Sporting Rifle magazine's auction for Save the Rhino. And finally, more than 300 gun dogs have been reported missing so far this year. Gun dog theft is on the rise, with working dogs accounting for 11% of all dogs reported stolen last year. The London area saw the most reports of thefts, followed by Kent, West Yorkshire and Lancashire. Labradors, Cocker Spaniels and Springer Spaniels are thought of as being at the greatest risk. That was the Shooting Show News.
All around me, harvest is about to begin. And this week on the Shooting Show, I'm going to be bringing you a rifle which is absolutely perfect for the application of going out over the freshly cut stubble fields with a lamp, or indeed making use of the last part of the buck season. Right now, the rut is in full swing, and this rifle will pretty much cater for both applications. I'm talking about the Savage Accustalker. Now, this was only brought into this country earlier in this year. I was at the launch with Edgar Brothers, and it is quite different to what you will have seen before. A lot of people think of Savage as sort of low-end budget rifles. This very much isn't the case, and is a collaboration between Edgar Brothers and Savage to bring to the UK market a rifle which really does fit the bill for what hunters in the UK need. What we have from Savage here is a rifle that encompasses all the best aspects of design that Savage offer in their line of rifles, from the action to the trigger to the bedding system. And I have to say, of all the Savage rifles that I've shot, this is most definitely the best. Aesthetically, the stock's not bad. It's got this grey-blue fleck on a light black background. It is injection moulded. You can see the seam along the top here, but as far as injection moulded stocks go, this is pretty good. And part of the reason for that is the chassis system that the rifle actually beds into, and we'll see that a little bit later. Instead of ending up with a very hollow, light-feeling stock, which always feels a bit cheap with injection moulded stocks, this is actually pretty good, and I don't think there'll be too many complaints about how it feels. We've got checkering on the pistol grip here. It's a fairly thin pistol grip, but for me that's pretty good because my hands are not all that big. Finger fits nicely on the trigger here. The length of pull's good too. At the front end of the stock, we've got a mild beaver tail. It's not overly swelled, and of course that is for more stability when shooting off a bipod, and also it gives you a wider platform to rest down on a sandbag in this really nice compact form that it comes in. And despite having a heavy profile barrel, with the fluting and the rest of the action being fairly light, it is slightly front heavy, but overall the rifle is not cumbersome in the slightest. If we turn our attention to the bolt itself, the first thing you will notice is the fairly generously sized bolt knob. It's not the prettiest of bolt knobs to look at, but functionally it does exactly what you want it to do. It's nice and easy to palm up. The bolt cycles very smoothly on the up and down stroke, so you won't have any problems there at all. You can see I have a scope mounted here, and the clearance is, there's miles of clearance there, so that's not a problem. But if you're going to be fitting units which are not the standard shape of a scope, you might have to be careful there. Now the rest of the bolt, it can be extracted from the rifle by pressing this lever at the front here and the trigger back at the same time, and that puts the bolt in your hand. It's fairly obvious to see that it's a relatively agricultural type looking bolt. You can see the cocking pin in the back here. Now on most bolts that's actually hidden inside. That's not a problem. I can't really foresee it being an issue. At the front we have something quite interesting. You'll actually see two collars here, and the reason for this is that on this Savage rifle, along with quite a lot of their other models, they have a floating bolt head. It is one of the mechanisms and design aspects that Savage use to help increase the accuracies of their rifle. But the reason for having a floating bolt head, according to Savage, is that it provides a more even bedding inside the receiver. Now, as some people will know, lapping the lugs inside a receiver is something that a lot of custom rifle makers do by putting a lapping compound along the back of the lugs and working it. It just makes the two faces mate up a lot more evenly, and that way you get a greater bearing surface on each lug with the inside of the receiver, and in turn you get a more even holding force when the bullet travels down the barrel. Safety located just here. the rear of the bolt, where you'd expect to find it. You simply slide it rearward, covers the red dot, it's on safe, the trigger won't pull. You slide it forward, and that's it, ready to fire. It is fairly quiet, not the quietest safety I've used in the world, but with a little bit of care in operation and a bit of pressure down, it's not too bad. It's very easy to use and sits exactly where your thumb would be sitting when you've got the rifle shouldered and ready to go. Just above that, you've got the cocking indicator at the back of the bolt, so when this is loaded, the cocking indicator will stick out. When it's fired, cocking indicator goes in, so you know that it's not loaded. Most people will have already noticed that the trigger on this rifle isn't the standard trigger you'd find on most rifles. This has been fitted with the now famous Savage Accustalker, which has been copied by at least one other manufacturer. Now I have to say that when it first came out, I was a little bit skeptical, but using them on and off over the last year and a half, I can't deny that they work. And certainly the trigger on this rifle is set almost bang on 2 pounds and has a very, very crisp let off indeed. Once you get used to the idea of squeezing the internal blade, which what you must view it as is a secondary safety. You've got your standard safety here, and your secondary safety is the fact that the internal blade has to be fully depressed before you actually get to the trigger itself. From trigger to magazine, the magazine is recessed inside this bottom metalwork here. Has quite a robust looking catch to it, which does require a fair amount of force in order to ping the magazine out. You just depress it and, oh, I didn't even catch it there. It comes out with a fair force, so you really need to have your hand over the top to stop it falling on the ground like I nearly did there. The magazine itself, it's a little bit of a fiddle to load. It's not the easiest magazine in the world to stack, but otherwise it works. So that's all the externals talked about. So now I'm going to get these action screws undone and let you see the bedding mechanism, which is probably the smartest part of this rifle. The first thing that's very clear to see is how the trigger mechanism works. So as I already explained, the internal blade acts as a safety. If I am to pull the external blade down, so pulling the trigger essentially, without depressing the internal blade, look what happens. The rifle goes off, but this face in here catches the sear before it has a chance to drop and the firing pin to engage the case. With that now engaged in this form, everything's locked down. You cannot make that trigger pull. You have to lift the bolt back up and recock it. Now if I operate it correctly, you will see how it works. By depressing the internal blade, this face drops down below here, which allows this bearing surface in here to be released when the trigger is pulled back and the rifle goes off. Very safe, very smart, and it works. From the trigger to the action, we've got a jammed washer type recoil lug system. What is a little bit different is the way that the barrel is attached to the receiver. And here we've got a locking lug. Quite often they have ridges on them, which does allow you with a key to undo the collar and actually take the barrel off. That's not common practice, however. On here there are no ridges. This is done up with a friction fit. And the reason why Savage do this is that they say it allows them to provide a more precise barrel fit to the receiver. What they do with the Savage is they have a whole threaded section in here, underneath this collar and into the receiver, and they basically screw the barrel in up until the head spacing gauge is nice and tight, and then they do the collar up. And this way you actually get a custom fit head spacing for every rifle. Here we have a whole rifle bedding chassis system, which the stock is actually built around. That gives it great strength. With it running almost the full length of the forestock, we end up with very good rigidity, which I mentioned earlier. And it not only provides a bedding surface for the recoil lug to slot into. If we have a look along the side of our metalwork here, you can see a faint line almost all the way along. Now this faint line comes from where this metalwork touches the actual chassis itself. The way this system works is that it's not only holding the action in place with the action screws, it is also using the flex and memory force of the metal inside the cradling chassis system to provide a supporting force on the action. And the way that it does this is that this cradle inside here is actually undersized. So when we slot this in here and put the action screws in, the metalwork inside the rifle is flexing outward slightly. And as it flexes outward, the memory of the metal wants it to squeeze back in, which means that it's contracting around the receiver this way while the action screws are pulling it downwards. And you end up with a very even and consistently accurate bedding surface in that way. At around the 1,500 quid mark, I think once it gets into the shops, you'll probably see it retailing for a bit less than that. It is competing with some very stiff competition. You're right in the sort of middle ground there, but you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few converts in the years to come, and this is certainly a very good start for Savage representing themselves in the British market with a rifle which really is tailored towards the kind of shooting that we do in this country. And I'm actually a little bit upset that I'm going to have to send it back tomorrow.
Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. This has been The Shooting Show.